Please give a big round of applause to National Book Award finalist Erica Armstrong Dunbar and to former Secretary of State and United States Senator and the first woman in U.S. history to become the presidential nominee of any major political party, #1 New York Times bestselling author Hillary Rodham Clinton.
So, good evening, Secretary Clinton.
It's been a good evening, hasn't it?
It's been a wonderful evening as we celebrate 100 years of reading and writing. And as you know, I'm a historian, so I think a lot about historiography or the writing of history. And I've been thinking a lot about our national story, or stories, and about the way that history allows us to think about a specific moment in time, about how it allows us to analyze society and culture, how we learn from history. What is the national story or stories that we need to tell now?
Stories are really important, especially if they have a factual basis.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
But I think we've just seen an example of why we've got to figure out what our story is. What are we telling ourselves? And maybe more importantly, what are we telling our children and our grandchildren? And right now, we have no narrative. We have a million different conflicting narratives about who we are, who we were, who we want to be. And I think it is a very dangerous time in our country, because we have no unifying sense of what we should be doing to try to forge a path forward to a better future. But we have a lot of competing voices, some of them demagogic and siren songs, some of them from even outside of our country with their own stories that they want us to believe about ourselves. And I don't think there's ever been a more important obligation than to try to begin to tell a more unifying story. And that doesn't mean we whitewash the past. You're an expert on that. You've written really important parts of the American story. But it means that we try to dig our way out of the morass we find ourselves in right now to see a little bit of light ahead of us that we can all believe is possible if we start, once again, believing that we can make a better future than our present or our past, and we work together to achieve it.
Yeah. I also think part of that national story includes understanding that history does repeat itself, or it can, and that we need to learn from it and have it impact or affect our present, definitely our future. And we're all here tonight sort of thinking about the power of reading and writing. And I think we often tie reading and writing to leadership, at least in the modern, or at least most of the time. We think about people who have capacious minds, who read a lot, who write a lot. But I do think we can make a connection between reading, writing, and leadership. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, I think you're right, and we started the evening with Doris Kearns-Goodwin talking about her latest book, which is about the 1960s, but she's also, given us an extraordinary look at prior times and leaders in our country. And I don't think you can be, I don't think you used to be able to be a leader without having read maybe not write, but at least read enough to know about American history and your place in it and what it is you were trying to achieve. And now, attention spans have shrunk so much that people believe that, sound bites and clicks and, videos substitute for, really reading and immersing yourselves in history. And I do think there's a big danger that we're forgetting big chunks of our history and therefore missing the lessons we should be learning, because there are patterns in human nature, human life, human interactions, and the decisions that leaders are faced with. I'm teaching a course now at Columbia about, crisis decision making, and it's all about how do leaders get the information they need to make decisions. And it's not just in the moment that you look, but how does that moment connect to previous times, and what do you learn from that? So I'm hoping that we can have more of an effort to try to re-educate ourselves about our own history through reading, and those able, like yourself, through writing, to make it an even richer story.
Can we just close on you talking a little bit about a specific era in history that you're thinking a lot about these days, and that's suffrage. And this sort of new venture, but also the connective tissue between topics around the right to vote for women in particular, but the right to vote more broadly, and the ways that we educate through the theater, through the arts, and the importance and the power behind, in particular, this issue around suffrage.
Well, Eric is referring to the fact that I have the great privilege of being a producer of Suffs, the new musical that is on Broadway this season, and it is the story of the critical period between 1913 and 1920. In 1913, the suffragists waged the first ever protest march in Washington, D.C. To claim the right for women to vote, and it took 7 years, but finally the 19th Amendment was passed. And there's three quick things to say about it. One, the stories of these individual women, the choices they made. Some of them had been fighting for suffrage for decades and were determined to play the inside game, to convince, first people in states and then eventually the Congress to go ahead and put the amendment to be ratified out across the country. Some were young and too impatient to wait around for that process, and they were the ones who were on the front lines. They were the ones picketing Wilson's White House. They were the ones literally going to jail, being force-fed because they were on hunger strikes. And you could see the kind of, yin and yang of how change is made in a complicated country like ours. And you needed both. You need the people who would have tea with Wilson and keep pushing him, shaming him in a very polite and ladylike way. And then the people protesting him and holding up the signs that he was betraying democracy, fighting a war overseas, but not giving women the right to vote. So it's a very relevant story, because how do we make change today? But it's also relevant because the sacrifices that were made to get the right to vote, the legal right to vote, which then took, another 40 plus years to get the legislation to actually enforce it. And now, we're facing a consequential, some say existential election, and there are people who are bored by it or frustrated by it or uninterested in it. And I just want to say, go see this, go read history, find out why people were willing to sacrifice so much, the suffragists, the civil rights workers, and for heaven's sakes, show up and vote.
Thank you, Secretary Clinton. And congratulations to Simon & Schuster.